my name is Tom Vasel, and this is the first video in a series of top 10s that I'm going to do about the alphabet in general. This series will range from 20 to 27. I don't know if every letter will warrant its own top 10. However, I mean, there's really no theme or underlying thing here. When I first started gaming, I did a top this is my favorite game of each letter, and some letters were hard to do, but now I think I can easily do 10 for each letter. But we're going to start out with not letters, but with digits, 0 through 9, numbers. So today I'm going to talk about my 10 favorite games that start with a number. Number 10 is 6 Nimmt. Now 6 Nimmt has actually had many different names, Slide 5, 5 Alive, whatever. The most common name for the game, though, is 6 Nimmt, currently put out by Mayfair Games. And this is a game in which all players are going to be playing cards down. They all have numbers on. You flip them over, and then those cards are slid into different rows based on the number that you played. And if you played the 6th card in a row, you will get all the cards in that row, and you don't want cards. Cards give points. And what's interesting about this game is it can be played up to 10 players. Some people think the game is very random. I don't think so. I mean, there certainly is a lot of chaos in the game, and even more as with the more players that are involved in this, but I think it's a very entertaining, fun game. That's 6 Nimmt. Number 9 is Dos de Mayo. Now, this is based on an actual historical event that happened in Madrid, where a group of Spanish revolters went up against the French army and were pounded down. And that's what happens in this game. It's an asymmetrical little 2-player game. I wouldn't say a war game, but where one player is trying to, as quickly as they possibly can, they're the French player putting down the Spanish Revolution, and the Spanish player is trying to survive as long as he can. You're going to eventually lose against the French, but if you last long enough, you will win the game. Simple, fun, interesting. It's a game that's kind of gone under the, hasn't been noticed for a while, but I think an excellent one. Number 8 is probably the most popular game on my list, I think, and that would be 7 Wonders. 7 Wonders is a fantastic game, made even better with the different expansions that have come out with it. This is another game that can fit a large group of people, and this is a drafting game where you're going to be taking cards and keeping them and building wonders of the world and different science buildings and trying to score points in various ways. And again, the game has a historical flavor to it. I mean, it's kind of abstract out, but simple enough that lots of people can jump into this one and play. This one especially goes higher on my list because I really liked the recent Tower of Babel expansion for the game. Number 7 is 7 Ages. Now, this is a game that I don't know when I'll play this again because the game takes a long time. But this is probably my favorite civilization game ever designed. Components are not very good, but in this game you can play pretty much any civilization. There's a ton, and each card in a deck of cards is a civilization, and you're going to be controlling more than one civilization, and they're going to grow and likely be destroyed somehow. So you start another civilization. You might be able to keep them going for a long time, and you can build wonders of the world. You can have great leaders leading that nation. You can get into wars. It's more complex than it needs to be. It's more fiddly than it needs to be, and yet the whole sum of the game is just really cool and overwhelming. You're like, wow, we just played a real civilization game. Really enjoy this one, 7 Ages. My number 6 is First and Goal. First and Goal is a football game in which 2 players are rolling dice against each other. First, you pick a card. You both play, that's your plays. You turn the plays over. The way the cards match up against each other shows the dice that the other person rolls. And then they roll them and see how many yards they get. A very simple concept made even better with all the different expansion teams that they came out with. Those expansion teams had some had better passing, some had better running. It's a simple concept. Even if you don't like football, you can probably get into it. And if you do like football, I think it's one of the best conversions of a fairly complicated sport into a simple dice game. Number 5 is a series of games, the 10-day series. There's 10 days in the USA, 10 days in Africa, 10 days in Asia, 10 days in Europe, 10 days in the Americas. I think I might be missing one, but there's a lot of different 10 days. My favorite, the one that I've hung on to the longest, is 10 days in Africa. But I like them all, really. They all teach geography. You can even mix them together and play a giant 50 days around the world or something. but essentially it's a game that takes a little bit of, if you've ever heard of Racco, takes a little bit of that where you're rearranging these cards in front of you to make a trip across America or across Africa or across Asia, Europe, etc. Really interesting on the cards, but really simple and easy. This is one of the best gateway games that they've come out with. Any one of them is good. They're also an excellent tool to teach geography. That's the 10 Days series. Number 4 is 1960, The Making of a President. In fact, this one was just recently announced that there's a reprint of this game coming from GMT Games. This is a sequel of sorts to Twilight Struggle, although it's not nearly as complicated as Twilight Struggle. 1960 takes the presidential race between Richard Nixon and John F. Kennedy, which is one of the closest presidential races in history. And you pick one of those candidates and you go across the different states and try to get votes, culminating in this big TV debate. And then the election happens and you see who wins. Really good, teaches the electoral system, lets you go back and forth with card play. It uses a lot of the same concepts that came in Twilight Struggle, but not nearly as complex, and yet I thought brings out a really good political fun game. That's 1960. Number 3 is 1775 Rebellion. Obviously, a lot of the games I have are going to start with dates. 1775 Rebellion was the follow-up to 1812, which just barely missed being on this list itself. 1775 is, well, about the Revolutionary War for America versus Great Britain or England, and each player is fighting. Sort of. There's a combat system, but it's more about area control because you're trying to control different regions and move things around. It works as 2-player. It's one of those games where the 2-player game can be expanded to 4 players, and I don't feel like it's, hey, we're 2 guys on the same side. No, instead you actively are working together, controlling different forces, and it brings a little bit of different strategic depth to the game. The game is just cubes on a board with dice rolling, and yet there's really tough decisions to be made, and it ends up playing out just like the historical event that happened. And I really like that when they take complicated historical events and put it down into a fun, fast game that is 1775 Rebellion. Number 2 is another 7 Wonders game. This one just came out, 7 Wonders Duel. This is 7 Wonders for 2 players. However, it's not just that. This is one of the best 2-player games that I've played in a long time, where you're building a civilization and there's a drafting, but drafting is hard to do with 2 players. So there's these cards on the side and you can draft them, and it opens up more cards as each one gets pulled out. And so you're trying to win by building all these different things that give you points. However, there's an automatic scientific victory and or an automatic warfare victory. And so there's 3 different ways to win. You're constantly going back and forth, playing the right cards. It's tense, it's interesting, has a historical flavor running throughout it. Just a really solid game, 7 Wonders Duel. And my number 1 favorite game that starts with a number is 1989 Dawn of Freedom, another date game. This one here is another follow-up to Twilight Struggle. This one's a more direct follow-up and covers the events that happened in 1989 in Eastern Europe, where many of the countries there threw off the shackles of communism and went free, the democracy. So one player is playing a communist player, trying to keep these nations in check, trying to keep them communist as long as they possibly can, and the other person is going to free them. And so the battleground will shift from country to country as the countries become free. The communist player will shift it elsewhere. There is a card system here where you play cards that let you do different things, but these cards also trigger actual historical events that went off during that time. It's a great, strong, historically flavored game. A lot going on. If you don't know a lot about 1989 events, you will learn about them. And if you do know about them, this game will bring them to life. It's a solid, solid game. So those are my 10 favorite games that start with a numerical digit. What are yours? Let me know in the comments. See you next time for my top 10 favorite games that start with the letter A.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at Dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.